diminishing from the soil. And so that's one way that we can really be careful to have plenty of pore space. Our soil is made up of aggregates, and healthy soil has lots of pores for air and water to move around in. And compaction reduces the opportunity for air and water to have a home in the soil. It's all the more troublesome if you step on your soil when it's wet. So it's tempting to get out there and garden at all times, but wait till the soil's dry. That's critical. Let's go ahead and flip the page and we can come back to that one. So cover crops help us help us answer your question also. Thanks, Leslie, for your help with this. You've noticed that this year in our gardens we've planted cover crops, several different kinds, and there are thousands. Any crop could really be a cover crop, but we make our choices about which cover crops to plant based on what they can offer the soil, what the soil's deficits might be. So if the soil is lacking nitrogen, we'll plant a legume as a cover crop because legumes have the incredible ability to grab nitrogen out of the air, bring it into their plant bodies, and then if we break down their plant bodies, it becomes a part of the soil. And nitrogen is a critical, something that our plants critically need. And it's cheaper and better for the environment to do it that way, better than purchasing a fertilizer from the store. Fertilizers from the store, even organic ones, not only are they costly for us as individuals, but they're costly for the environment. We're depleting our access to those minerals. We're going to run out, and we will have forgotten how to keep our soil strong without them. And they tend to come in a package with more than we need. So what the plant doesn't need gets eroded and ends up in the water stream. And so we're finding that our waters are polluted with excess nutrient from fertilizers, and so that's a shame. So all the more reason to grow your nutrients as cover crops. And also then you have something in the soil, ideally year-round. The soil wants to be covered. We go into the forest, and when do you see bare soil in the forest that doesn't have pine needles or leaves, broken down creatures, and other plant material? Never, right? The natural world wants to be covered like our skin wants to be covered when we've experienced a cut or a wound. And so I see bare soil, especially when driving across the country. You can see lots of tilled up earth. It worries me and sort of breaks my heart. It seems like an open wound. There are nutrients leaching out of that soil. And why not plant a cover crop, especially in the winter, to help protect it from all of the ravages of weather and time with nothing growing. So planting a cover crop limits the erosion of nutrients, which can happen from storms and so on. It reduces or eliminates fertilizer need. It may fix nitrogen from the climate and make it available for plants that can't do this, or many, I mean, instead of may. It increases pore size because something like winter rye grows deep roots and goes through compacted sections and even into the subsoil a bit and creates passages for air and water to travel. And so when the plant can do that for us instead of heavy equipment, we've done a great favor to the soil. So that was increases pore size. It indirectly reduces pest and disease pressure. So because it improves the soil health, plants are going to thrive. Disease and pests tend to be drawn to plants that are not doing well. And so it indirectly then means you will likely have less pest and disease pressure. Does that make sense? Okay. And then I've mentioned this previously, that it more closely resembles natural processes. And it improves soil structure. So who's heard of clay, loam, and sandy soil? Anybody? Yeah. So in Colorado, we have a variety really, and it's always on folks' mind. If they have clay soil, how can they improve their soil quality? It's an older practice to add sand to your clay soil, which is a real no-no. If you meet anybody who's doing that, try to politely dissuade them from doing that. It's a recipe for concrete, and it's misguided. The way that you improve your clay soil is by adding organic matter, like a cover crop or compost. The way you improve your sandy soil is by adding organic matter, or like a cover crop or compost. So organic matter is really the solution that we're after in lots of different circumstances. All right, any questions about cover crops before we move on? There's a lot to say about them, and I'd like, as part of our final time together, we'll go look at the cover crop together. Does that sound good? All right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You were talking about putting something on top of it besides cover crops, like mulch or
Yeah.
So in case you don't have a cover crop, covering it with, say, old leaves or old garden matter, or would that be a second choice?
Yes, and not even second choice, but also wise choice. Some gardeners prefer mulch because cover crops can be kind of athletic to incorporate at times, depending on which ones you've planted. And mulch also protects the soil. You want to be mindful that if you have wood chips as mulch, that you don't incorporate them into the soil, because they tie up the nutrients in the soil to decompose, and they take 10 years to decompose. And you also may not know the source of your wood chips. They may have a content that's treated or something. Yeah, I don't know. So wood chips do make a fine mulch, but just keep them on the upper layer above the soil itself. Leaves are excellent. They do tend to blow away, so you can pin them down with some fabric row cover if they're on your garden over the winter. And if as the plants grow, they kind of help hold in the leaves as well in other seasons. What other mulches have people used? What about straw? That's what we used in our grow garden to table gardens last year, is straw that had not been treated with pesticide. Coffee grounds are an excellent addition to compost, and I haven't seen them used as mulch. Do you use them as mulch on top?
I add them to my mulch.
Awesome. Oh yeah, I bet that's an excellent thing. I'll look into it some more, and if we send this video around, we'll include some more information about coffee grounds benefit to the garden in the notes. What else? Anybody else?
I think, some of our gardens have used newspaper.
Yeah.
Mostly for weed control, I think.
Yeah. If you do that, it's important to not use the glossy stuff, because it's printed with ink that we don't love to have in the more toxic source of ink. But the kind you get printed on ordinary newsprint is soy-based ink, is what I've heard. And if you do use newspaper as a sheet in your garden, you should use just a single layer, I've read, instead of multiple layers, because that can cause your soil to not get as much access to air and water. So mulch is an excellent way to cover the soil as well, like a Band-Aid for the soil. I'm going to check our time. It's 4:43. So we'll move through a few more things and then answer some questions. And if anyone has to slip out, that's okay. Oh, I just want to, we've already flipped the page. Good, okay. Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate that. All right, so more on tilling. Why low till? Over-tilling can cause an impervious layer to develop. So sometimes farmers or even gardeners will use a blade on a rototiller or heavy equipment, and you'll notice that the soil quality, I won't say it's better up here, but there's a distinct difference between the layer that is the blade dimension and underneath it, because you've created this impervious layer. And when there's a separate texture, the water tends to just collect there if the two aren't similar. And so this gets sort of hard pan, and the water just can't penetrate, and that causes harm. It causes harm. if a change in soil texture can create water movement problems. During the Dust Bowl, we experienced a great loss. There were perennial grasses growing all over this country, and the soil was in great shape as a result. Those perennial grasses their roots ran deep into the soil, and we started plowing up and developing, and we caused the Dust Bowl in doing that because of all of our overwork. Overworking causes heat and overactivity, so it can actually be kind of exciting for the soil to be tilled at first, but it starts burning up all its nutrients really fast, and then you don't have as much available later in the season for your plants. And this causes things to decompose pretty fast as well. And in the garden, we want slow decomposition for optimal soil health. I had the opportunity to go to a cooking school years ago, and the instructor was often yelling at us, "Why are you stirring?" Because we would nervously stir things whenever she was around, especially. But in general, if we didn't know what to do, we'd stir whatever we were working on. Right?
Yeah, you don't
but
want to overstir.
you don't. So if any of you are cooks, even amateur cooks, we know that to get a good seal on your vegetable that's been cut, you need to let it spend some time in contact with the pan. And the soil needs time too to do its thing. And I think we nervously till because we have this idea, maybe from gardening magazine photos, I don't know, that weed-free, pristine, fine seed bed, something that looks like potting soil we got at the gardening store, that's optimal. And it's just not. So having larger, in some circumstances, larger aggregates of soil is fine. If you're planting little carrot seeds, you might want a finer seed bed. But if you're planting a tomato plant, something like this, you don't need your seed bed to be finely processed by a rototiller. I'm not against tilling, but I think it should be done very mindfully, just like you are mindfully stirring your food at the right moment. So right before you plant your spring garden is a great time to till, but it's not as necessary in the fall to do a deep tilling. A lot of people really go to town on that, and it's not necessary.
6 inches tilling?
Yeah, to prepare your spring seed bed. Yeah, I think that would be about right. It would depend on what you're planting and how, it would depend on the nature of your soil and how compacted it might be underneath that 6 inches. We use that broad fork, to get as many as 18 inches deep to create more pore space for our soil, air, and water without tilling. That's the beauty of a broad fork tool. It loosens the soil, it aerates the soil without turning it over. It's really disruptive. Think of the soil as a community with many different moving parts and patterns and people, little organisms that have a whole functioning system. And then we go in and we turn it up, and we're causing harm when we do that. We're not having faith that good things are happening in our soil already. So let's move on. Oh, good. So the last little bit here is for any remaining questions. Anybody have any ideas about open questions you've had for spring as you prepare to plant your gardens with students? Paula, Irina, anybody, or Leslie, you're a parent lead at Emeralds, or Eddie with your home garden.
That's a heavy question. How do you know you have good soil? How do you test your soil?
That's a great question. In Colorado, we have such alkaline soil that I don't recommend the soil testing kits that you take home and do yourself. They tend to be very inaccurate for alkaline soils. So if you have $35-45 to spare and it's interesting to you to get more information, I recommend contacting Colorado State University. They have instructions on their website for how to send them a soil sample, and they'll go to town on it, and they'll use their great tools to do a really good assessment for you. And
more than one box like this. Each box probably has different.
exactly.
So you want to test each box.
It depends on how fastidious you are. They do recommend pulling samples. If you did have, let's say somebody had one box and they wanted to know their soil, they would pick 5 different parts of the box, or I think it's 5, and mix it together, the instructions say. And then for a garden with multiple beds, I think you'd have to ask yourself, did you start one in 1990 and another one in 2008? Then I would test the soil differently. And also, if you had different practices, gardening practices year to year, you might see different soil types. If you filled them all with the same soil from the store, from Lee Hill Peat or Pioneer or something, then chances are you're going to have a similar profile if you got it all on the same day. Those sorts of places have very, very varied soil because it's a non-regulated industry, and they do their best to have predictable product. But there's a soil scientist named Jean Reeder who used to be my neighbor in Fort Collins. And she said, if you really want to know what you're about to put in your garden, you don't worry, you won't insult the person you're buying your soil from. Ask to go test the batch that you're going to buy. It's tricky to do, but it's worth doing. So, other best practices questions? Other spring gardening questions? Lindsay, anything I'm missing? Ruth? Leslie?
I'm pretty excited that our gardens have had the benefit of cover crop this go round. You know, this kind of a new thing for Garden to Table.
Yeah.
We just started mulching maybe a year or two ago, and now we're doing cover crops. So I feel like we're really investing in our soil health, which is pretty cool.
It's satisfying to me. So you're not seeing mulch around the lettuce because we've determined with parent feedback that it's a little bit messy for second graders who are harvesting lettuce. And so we'll add the straw mulch, the pesticide-free straw mulch that you saw last year. We have a great source for that in Fort Collins, a friend of mine who I trust who doesn't use pesticide on it and who doesn't let it go to seed. We'll pick that up soon, and we'll mulch the summer gardens once things start to germinate. And the cover crop, let's go together. Anybody who wants to stick around and turn in our cover crop with us. What we've done so far, I'll just briefly explain. This time of year, after having planted it in the fall, it came up in the spring. We terminate it, euphemistic way of saying we killed it. That's how it's referred to in the cover crop world. Terminate it and let it dry on the top of the soil. And then we integrate it about a week later. And the reason we don't do it all in one fell swoop is we want to have a we want to have a fungal decomposition of that cover crop and not a bacterial decomposition. The fungal decomposition is slower, and we want everything to move as slowly as possible in our soils. So this cover crop has been terminated by Leslie, and we'll go integrate it together, and you can see what that looks like. We're about 3 weeks from planting. It's important to integrate your cover crop about 3 weeks before planting. So we'll leave it there, and
Do you pull it out?
what's that?
Do you pull it out, or you just mix it with a fork? You get it out of
When we terminate it, or when we integrate it? The way I do it when I'm terminating it is I just take a hoe and go underneath the root, and to some degree I try to flip the plant so the root is not in the soil anymore. The plant can have a tendency to re-root itself pretty easily, especially winter rye. So we just, as best we can, try to disrupt it without burying it in that first chop. And then when we integrate it, we try to actually cover it with the soil so it can decompose for 3 weeks. And it's not a problem to chop it some more during that period of time, just to give it some extra help. And Eddie and I the other day, we had a lot of people in a small garden, so we twisted a bunch of cover crop to make it smaller with our hands. It's like chewing before swallowing, just to pre-metabolize it a little bit better and give the garden a hand. So we'll do that together right now.
Can it decompose if it's not watered?
Good question. Yes, but it helps to have water. And I wouldn't water it before integrating it. I'd water it a little after. I haven't considered that.
3 weeks of decomposting.
I wouldn't water it like a planted garden. I'm going to put that in the notes because nobody's ever asked me that, and I've not asked myself that. Yeah, that's a great question. I can say for now I would not purposefully water it daily, but let's put in the notes what to do.
Winter when, in the spring when we do have rains, right?
True. True. So maybe that's one reason I've never had to consider it, is there was free water coming from the sky and I didn't have control over it. But during a very dry 3 weeks, that's a really interesting question. Would it be a good idea to water your soil a little bit? I think so. Yeah, soil needs 25% water in it to be in optimal health. So it's 4:55. Let's spend our last